Hello and happy Halloween, everyone. We are so glad to see you, but the trick is we're not really here. We are pre-recording this, so we will be there with you in the comments, but know that we are pre-recording this. But welcome to our Halloween show. You know, when we have JimHarold on, that we are going to get some good stories of all sorts. You're going to be surprised and amazed, fulfilled. That part of you that needs it, you'll get fulfilled today. So we got Rhonda, who's with us in the top. Well, are you guys the same? Rhonda's in the top, Beck's in the middle. Yeah.
Yep.
And so that's our beautiful team, and we're all here for you. And here's your sage, clearing away any negativity if you want. And so Bex, let's why are we having JimHarold on again, if anyone needs to ask?
Well, today we chose to have JimHarold on because who wouldn't be? I mean, he's the obvious guest for our Halloween episode. He is the OG of Paranormal podcast. He is amazing. If you've never heard his podcast, I highly suggest you go check them out. He has so many of them. Start with JimHarold's Campfire or the Paranormal podcast. I'm a total Campfire junkie. I listen to them all the time. It's amazing. It helps me clean the house. But before we get into the different types of podcasts, first, Jim, I want to say welcome to our show again. Thank you for coming back and hanging out with us and keeping the spooky spirit alive for our audience. I would like to ask you, I know we've touched on it before in previous episodes, but I'm always interested to hear a person's origin story. So I'd like you just to touch on briefly how you ended up in this line of work.
Well, first of all, I just want to say a big thank you. It's always a pleasure being with you all in this spooky time of the year. So thank you. I got my invitation. I'm like, oh, they have me back. And I really appreciate it very much. So thank all three of you for that. Always a pleasure to be here. In terms of my origin story, it actually goes way back. If people are old enough to remember a show called In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. I was but a wee kid in elementary school, and I used to watch it on TV, and that kind of set me off on a lifelong interest in the supernatural and the paranormal. And when I talk about the paranormal, I kind of cast a wide net. Ghosts, cryptid creatures, spirituality, UFOs, the whole gamut, not just ghosts, because these days when people say paranormal, they mean ghosts only, but I mean all of the kind of interesting stuff that falls a little outside of maybe the mainstream thinking of scientists and so forth. And I decided to start podcasting back in 2005 when nobody knew what a podcast was. And I said, well, what am I going to do? Something on what is a little bit different that I'm not seeing out there from the early podcasts, and what is something that I love. And that was the paranormal. Started as kind of a hobby. Lo and behold, it caught on several years later. Actually, about 10 years ago, I went full time, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So I'm very blessed and very thankful, and still am just as fascinated by the paranormal and the supernatural as I was when I was that little kid watching Leonard Nimoy.
I love that so much. And I think it's it speaks volumes to who you are as a person and your mission here, because it's not only about providing amazing entertainment, but providing a safe place for people to share their experiences and giving validation to others, which I think is something that we're coming more and more into awareness of, is that our validation is coming from sharing experiences. And I really appreciate that you're able to show up that way for others.
Thank you. Thank you. That's important. With the Campfire program, I really want to have a place where people can, no judgment zone, and they could come in and share their experiences and not be worried that anybody's going to ridicule them or laugh at them or smirk behind their backs. Yeah, this is simply come on the show. And I think almost everyone has had a weird experience, and that goes for believers and non-believers. Almost everyone has had something that kind of made you think, what was that all about? So that's what we want to share on the Campfire. And that show's been going now for 13 years, which is amazing to me. Lucky 13, I guess. And it's been a lot of fun. And I hope that it's provided entertainment, but also, again, like you said, that space where people can share their stories in a supporting environment.
Absolutely. And then you have the professionals come in on the paranormal podcast as well, sharing their experiences where they've really honed in on their mastery of certain topics. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, the paranormal podcast was actually my first show, and that was a show exactly as you described. That's a show where I interview the authors and experts about their theories, their books, their work in various areas. Ghosts, UFOs, cryptid creatures, the unknown, the afterlife. And really, that was just what it was for, was that. That doesn't mean, I want to make it clear, I don't necessarily agree with every theory that comes across on the show. But my idea is not to really forward my theories, but to say, okay, this is what this person says. You can listen, see what you think, maybe get their book if it's of greater interest to you, whatever it might be. But again, putting that information up for people to be able to access and say, yeah, I think this person makes sense. Or honestly, somebody saying, maybe this is not my cup of tea and this is not the theory that I agree with. But the information is out there. So that's what we do on the Paranormal Podcast. And again, that shows up to, it's hard to believe, 17 years now.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing. And I know that we just talked briefly before we started recording that you have a relaunch of another really scary podcast that you have coming back on soon. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. In 2011, I started a very early true crime podcast before Serial. I made the mistake. It was in my Plus Club, so it was kind of hidden away. I brought that out for free in 2018 and did it for about a year where people could freely access the most recent episodes. It was called JimHarold's Crime Scene. To date, we've done about 192 episodes. That's up through 2019. When you're doing this sorts of thing, you kind of pick and you choose and say, okay, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to set this other thing aside. But I always had it in my head that I would bring that back because it's kind of a serious look. It's the same format as the Paranormal Podcast, but the difference is we're talking the true crime authors and we take a serious look at it. I don't try to sensationalize it. I don't try to make it super gruesome. It's not like I'm saying, hey, tell me about exactly the way they killed this person. But it's a serious look at true crime and talking with serious authors about the subject. I mean, I've had Pulitzer Prize winners on, New York Times bestsellers. It's one of my favorite shows that I do. And I think there is a certain overlap between people interested in paranormally oriented content and true crime. I think it's like a Venn diagram, and there are some people interested in both. So I thought it was kind of a natural offshoot, and I'm excited we've already started recording interviews for that, and I'm excited to get that back going after Halloween in November because I think it's a good show and want to take another crack at that genre, but enjoy doing it. And we try to be respectful and we try to get the information out there of these authors and experts who have covered different cases. Some of them are the most well-known you would know, like Jack the Ripper. Some of them are far more local to various places and more obscure. But regardless, we try to treat them in the same respectful manner while still being interesting. And looking forward to getting that going again in November.
That sounds very exciting, and it's definitely going to be interesting. I think that we've seen an increase in collective interest in true crime stories. That's really seeming to peak at this time. So I think it's going to be a hit, and it's very, very exciting for you and for those you have on. Let's talk about some of the spooky stories that you have, heard throughout your experience on the show. I know that you've probably heard quite a few that have been really intense or powerful. I know that you shared one with us, I think our first episode about the saloon, and that one still gives me chills every time I hear it. What's a good one that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, this one, I called this The Strange Rescue, and this one was this last year, so it's fresh content. And this is one of my favorites because it's kind of ones that my favorite kind of stories, the real head scratchers, kind of like the Roadhouse Saloon. Yeah. So this was about, I believe her name was Jen, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. She was, this was in the early 80s. She was a young woman. She had just graduated college, but she decided to stay at home with her mom and sister. She kind of didn't know exactly what she was going to do with her life. So anyway, she is taking this evening class, which is, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes from her house. This is up in Vermont, and it's winter time. It's cold. And lo and behold, she's driving a little bit older car, and she's driving home, and the car gives out. So she pulls out along the side of the highway. Now, she's by herself, and this is pre-cell phone, so there's no cell phones to rely on. We've kind of become very fortunate with those and kind of spoiled a little bit. But those of you who are a little bit older will remember when that wasn't an option. I certainly remember that, when you didn't have that option. So she was on a highway, and she said, well, I'm not going to just sit here and be a sitting duck for maybe somebody with nefarious plans. I'm going to get out. I see there's a road down there, and there's a light. Maybe that's a house. I can go and find a phone and get some help. So anyway, she walks down off of the embankment. She said that she wasn't very well dressed for it. She had on a dress skirt and dress shoes, and she really wasn't planning on having to hike. So she crawls down this embankment through this brush and so forth. And she looks, and there's a gas station. She's like, this is my lucky day. I have this great access to this gas station. So she walks in. There's a young man behind the counter. And she says, hey, tells him the situation. My car's up on highway. Could I get some help? And he points at the clock, and it's 7:55. He says, we close at 8. And she's like, well, I'm here by myself. I don't really have any options. Couldn't somebody help me? He said, well, the owner lives next door. Maybe he can help you. And all of a sudden, no sooner he says that, the guy seems to appear from thin air. So it's a man, maybe in his 50s. He's very kind, almost fatherly. And she tells him situation, says, can you go up and take a look? And he's like, sure, I'll go take a look. He goes and takes a look. And he says, well, I know what's wrong with it, but I can't fix it. Not tonight. Can I tow you to a garage? Do you have a garage your family uses or something? And she said, well, yeah, but it's like 20 minutes away. He said, no problem. So he gets his tow truck, picks it up, tows it to this place. And, she's thinking, oh, I'm alone with this guy. I don't know who he is, but she didn't feel that way at all. She felt very comforted, very much like she was safe, non-threatening. And they get to the place, and he tells her what to write on the little slip that he puts in the drop box with the keys, and she writes it and puts it in. And he says, do you, can I drop you off at your home? He's like, yeah, that's another 40 minutes. And he said, no, that's no problem. I'll do it. I'll help you out. So he drives 40 minutes, drops her home. This guy is like the nicest guy ever. And they get to the house, and she said, well, I just realized I don't have any money to pay you. I only have a couple dollars. She had asked him how much. He said $20. I only have a couple dollars. And she says, well, I do have a check. Would you take a check? And he's like, sure. So she writes out the check and gives it to him. And he says, that'll be fine. Thank you. And go in and tell your family everything's absolutely fine. There's no problem. Everything is going to be just fine. So he really impressed that by her. So she shook his hand. She left, went in to see her family. And she thought, this is just the nicest man ever. $20 for all of this bother and rigmarole that he's gone through. And just the nicest guy ever, just almost like a saint. So anyway, a couple days later, they're going to town. And the family, the Jen and her sister and her mom said, you know what, we're going to drive by that place because that was the nicest guy ever. And I want you to see the place I'm talking about. And she drives to the spot, and her jaw dropped. That gas station that, had the lights and was gleaming, it looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was totally boarded up, and there's like graffiti and stuff on the walls. And her mom and her sister were like, you sure you're in the right place? You're sure you're in the right place? And she said, yes,
Oh my God.
I am.
Wow.
I am in the right place. This is where it's at. And oh, by the way, Jen says it's been a while, but to the best of her recollection, that check It was never cashed. And if anybody's been to a garage, you know they cash the checks. So
That's so cool.
Wow.
That is
Wow.
wild. It's funny because I've been little stories that have that same premise. I've been seeing them popping up online a lot about people going for long, drives at night, and they find a town and then they go back and look for it and the town's never there, or it's all just, destroyed buildings, old, I love that this is the story that you came with tonight, because it just seems like it's a theme that's popping up for me right now.
Well, there's another one very similar, and this might have been a couple of years ago. I don't know if I shared it on the show or not, but it is one of my favorites. And about a young woman, I guess this would have been in the 90s, in the Atlanta area. She was playing with some friends, and they went in this wooded area, and they looked off and they saw a clearing with this like very old kind of stately house. And they saw a woman come out with a little boy, holding him by the hand. And the little boy and the woman they were looking at him. They saw the group of kids, and the boy had like knee pants on, and the woman looked like she was dressed in older kind of costuming from like the 40s or 30s or something. And the house looked very, very old, but it looked like it was in great shape. Like it was, maybe something a wealthier person had. But they'd never seen this place before. So, they thought, boy, that is weird. That's just a weird thing to see. And then they go back maybe a few days later and said, let's go check out that old house. And they actually walked back further to where the house was. And I use the word was because all that was left was a foundation.
Wow.
So, I mean, I wonder about time slips. I wonder about crossing of different realities. I don't know what the answer is, but I have one. Can people say, well, you've done a lot of these stories, and now it's been certainly thousands of stories by now. But the one thing that comes across to me is that reality is far different than just the basics that we understand. Time may not be fully linear. I was actually talking to my daughter about this because my youngest daughter had a dream that's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. And this was before she was, I think she would have been in middle school, and she had a dream that she saw this man in the dream. She'd never seen him before in his life, and the person just bothered her. And she almost remembered this. And then I don't know if it was her high school graduation or her middle school graduation, one or the other. The photographer matched this person's description exactly in her dream. Now, nothing was wrong with the photographer. He was cool. There was no problem. He didn't do anything sinister or anything like that. He was just doing his job, taking pictures. But she had a premonition of him years before. And when I was talking with her about it, I wonder sometimes if our world is kind of like a computer. They talk about random access memory, where the computer can access, it doesn't have to go across. It can just access different points on the drive and access the information it needs. Sometimes I'm wondering if we're like this and we randomly access things across time, across different realities. I don't know the answer, but it sure makes you think.
Yeah, is that sort of like what maybe deja vu is? Sometimes like just random accidentally, just a few minutes in the future, or just like, or
an intersecting of timelines.
Yep, it is. I will tell you, it's strange.
Do you remember any of your own deja vu, Jim? Like, have you had some deja vu? Because they usually stick out. I
have had some. None are coming to mind right now, but I have had some, and it's this distinct feeling that, I've been here before, I've done this before, and it feels so real that I think there's something to it. Now, some people say it's brain processing, like it's a glitch in your brain, and you process something and the processing doesn't go through, so it like repeats. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've definitely had it. I've definitely had it on multiple occasions. None that I'm picking out right this moment, but I've definitely had that feeling.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a lot of different ways that are tried to explain it away, but there's more. There's so much more than we can possibly comprehend. what's going on. Like I mean, with all the different, I mean, even recently, I say recently, but it's been probably like past 10, 20 years where scientists have really been trying to study spirits, you know, when a person crosses over and detecting the energy of a spirit leaving the body and being able to see that, you know, there is some sort of shift in the body weight and all of that can determine that there's something that happens, you know, whether that, I mean, it's still unexplainable at this point, but there's so much more that we could possibly try to figure out all of this, that, you know, it's just, I don't know, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that woman with the child, if she was looking at those kids thinking they were apparitions.
Right. That's a good
You know?
question.
And I think maybe that's what's happening with what we see as an apparition.
Well, I have a story like this. I bet you I have told this on the show because it's one of my favorite. But I'll tell it again because it goes right to your point exactly. And thank you for your choice of shirt today. That's a JimHarold Stay Spooky shirt. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's great. So this was a story of a young man. He's probably in his 20s, and he told me of these two things that happened during his childhood that were very curious. He remembers being about 6 years old, walking through the hallway past this is the family home. He walks in the hallway past the kitchen, and he sees this strange hooded figure looking like he's making a sandwich. And he's like, who is this? He thought it was a ghost, and he ran away. So that's when he's about 6 years old. When he's about 16 years old, he's minding his own business in the same house, in the kitchen, making himself a peanut butter sandwich, wearing a hoodie. And he looks out the hallway, and this, what appears to be a small boy, runs up and then runs away. And then he realized he just saw himself.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think.
It does.
I've done this. You guys remember when we were taking Emily's class and learning to read the Akashic records, one of the exercises was to go back to when we were in our childhood or infancy or something, whatever. That's where I went anyway. And all my life I've had this memory of this amazing being that visited me and played with me for a while my mom and grandma were there arguing like they always did, you know, and it was like, and so as an infant in my little seat where I really couldn't see out there was someone that came and played with me. So when I'm sitting there doing Emily's assignment, I go back and I see myself and I start playing with myself. And then suddenly I hit the memory like, oh my God, I'm seeing myself play with it was like, oh my God, I think that's precious or something. It was cool.
Oh, that was you the whole time. That is, and we had a really interesting discussion on the Paranormal Podcast with a gentleman by the name of Anthony Peake. And he's written a number of books, including one called Cheating the Ferryman. And his thesis is, and I'm not saying this is right, but it does make you think, is that we have like, it's almost like a guardian angel, but the guardian angel is us. He calls it an eidolon. And the idea that it follows us around. And his thesis is that we do live multiple lives, but we live as the same person. And we keep evolving within that same person, but we've lived every possible combination of that person. So, for example, here's how he would explain it. He talked about a situation where he almost got into a fatal car accident, and except for jerking the wheel, something telling him to jerk the wheel at the last minute, he would have been killed. He says that is his eidolon, who is actually him on a higher level, that knows everything that's going to happen. So that's that little voice. He says that's that little voice you hear when something says, don't go here, go there. Don't take a left turn, take a right turn. He says that explains that small, still voice that kind of guides you throughout life. Again, I'm not saying it's a right theory, but it is very thought-provoking. That's Anthony Peake, and his recent book was Cheating the Ferryman.
Wow.
Pretty
That's a
neat.
very cool theory.
And that would go with the whole story of the baby, and that would kind of tie into that a little bit.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a dream a couple days ago that, and in my dream, it felt like my grandmother, but it didn't look like her. It looked similar. But I remember walking up to this woman who looked like her, but wasn't. And I said, will you please be my spirit guide? Will you please be my spirit guide? And I wonder if maybe that was me, if I was talking to myself, in an older age, because it wasn't my grandmother, but it felt like her and it looked similar. So really, that makes me think, because it was driving me crazy. I'm like, I don't know who that was, but I know I knew her, and it felt like, it was crazy.
And one of the cool things to me about the Campfire show is, on the face of it, it's like, oh, we're telling each other spooky stories. And we are, and that works on that level. But if you think about things and the implications of some of the stories, it opens up a whole different level of possibilities. And I like to think about it. Yeah, that's a cool spooky story. Ooh, tell me more. And I do enjoy that part of it. And that's fun, particularly this time of year. But it also speaks to the broader reality of life and what this is all about, and how it is much more complex than we kind of think about it in our workaday world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I like to say, putting the normal back into the paranormal, because I think the paranormal is more normal than most people let on. They just don't want to tell each other about it.
That's right.
You said, and your show gives a whole outlet for those people to come out of the paranormal closet and just let their freak fly, or whatever you want to call it.
So many people have come on the show and said, I don't, and this is not to discredit experiencers, but my ears really perk up when someone says, A, I don't believe in any of this, and B, I've never had another experience, but now let me go ahead and tell you my experience. And then they tell you something incredible. Wow. And that's happened multiple times. And a lot of times they'll say, I'm still not really a believer, but I don't really know what to do with this.
Right.
And I kind of smile to myself, and it's like, yeah, the supernatural exists. You may not want to admit it, but it does exist. But I give those people credit for having the intellectual honesty to say, yeah, I'll tell my story, even though I'm not, I don't consider myself a paranormal person. I will step out on a limb and admit, yes, I did have this experience, and no, I don't know how to explain it. I think that's pretty cool.
It is very cool. And you find that almost everyone, if not everyone, has had an experience they can't explain. Mm-hmm. It's so much more common than we allow ourselves to realize. And it is a point of connection if we find a way to move past that fear of being seen as crazy.
I agree.
It's an amazing thing to be able to connect over.
And I think over the years, it has changed a lot. I think that people are more open to sharing their stories. I think that there's less, stigma about it. And I'm really glad. And again, it's not because of me. I'm just one tiny little part, but I'd like to think that, if there's, it's kind of like, if anybody remembers Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, and when the Berlin Wall was finally torn down, you saw these people knocking with the hammers and stuff. And I hope that at least I'm one of those people with the hammers who's saying, hey, it's okay to share your experiences. I think that's kind of cool. I have a family story that we just got in last week I'd like to share with you, if that's okay. And this is one of my favorite kinds of stories, because I think it speaks to how our spirits live on and how we might interact with loved ones. This was, I think, a great-grandmother of our caller. And this would have dated back to the time of the Spanish flu, 1918, back that time. So we're talking, quite a ways back, 100 years plus. And I believe her great-grandmother was married and had a son. And then, unfortunately, due to the Spanish flu, the husband died. So she was a widow with this young boy. And a few years went on, and she met an older man, and they got married. So anyway, it's the day of the wedding, and I got the sense these were not wealthy people or anything like that, just normal folks. And they had the wedding and the reception at the home, and all the guests were there and collected and so forth. And all of a sudden, somebody knocks on the back door, and it's a man. And one of the family members goes to the back door, and he says, I need to speak with, I don't know what her name was, but I need to speak to the bride. I have something I need to tell her. And they said, well, she's in talking with all the guests. Come on in. And he said, no, I'm sorry. I can't come in. So can you get her to here? And they said, well, we'll try, but she's talking to her guests. So a few minutes go by, knocks on the door again. Can I see so-and-so? I have something I have to tell her. And they said, well, she's talking with the guests. Can you come back? Can you come? I mean, can you come in? Can you come in? And he says, no, I can't come in. I can't come in. But please, if you could bring her in, I have something I must tell her. A few more minutes go by. She still doesn't go in the back. Knocks on the door again. And he says, well, I've really got to go. But just tell her I want to wish her the best. I think she's found a very good man. And I really think it's great the way that he thinks of the young boy and how he cares for the young boy. I think that's fantastic. And I wish you all the best. And he said, well, let me try to go get her. Person goes back. He's gone. Now that's behind the house. It's totally clear. It's like a plane except for a railroad track. And they look back and forth and no sign of the guy. And she's like, well, who was he? And they said, well, we don't know who he was. Well, what did he look like? And they described him. And she turned white as a ghost because the description of the person met that of her late husband to an absolute T.
Wow.
I have goosebumps.
Wow.
So it's not only spooky ooky, it's kind of too. I mean, I believe this, that our loved ones can reach back in different ways. I don't know how easy it is for them, but I believe that it can and does happen. I do love family stories that stand the test of time, and I thought that was a beautiful one.
That is beautiful. And so powerful. And it shows us that there's definitely more than just this life. There's definitely more that happens. We don't just end when we die. So I think that's powerful and beautiful and comforting.
Very, very comforting indeed.
So good.
So tell us about your scariest crime scene story. That one that you find the scariest. Because my mother always had this saying when we were kids. It's not the dead you need to fear, it's the living. I will tell you kind of one of the creepiest cases that most people don't know about. And it actually has a tie to me because I grew up right where it happened, right in the area it happened. I live in the Cleveland, Ohio area. And when I was a kid, I lived in the city. I lived in kind of a tough part of town. I literally lived on the wrong side of the tracks. You could look out the window and see railroad tracks out of one window, and the other you could see the smokestacks from the steel mills where my dad worked. And along those tracks in the 1930s were dumped the bodies in what were called the torso murders in Cleveland, Ohio. It was a number of murders where both the head and many times the hands were severed from the person. And it gets stranger. You guys have heard of Elliott Ness, right? Of Untouchables fame. Well, he was safety director in Cleveland at the time this all went down. This was after he was in Chicago and he became safety director. And he was in charge of trying to find this crazed killer in the 30s who was dumping these bodies without heads and without hands along this stretch of railroad tracks. That was called Kingsbury Run. And there were a number of murders. I can't remember how many, but they never caught the person. Now, there was one person who was somehow tied to a political family, a powerful political family, who ended up who Ness had pointed out as a possible suspect and who was committed to an insane asylum. And after he was committed, there were no more murders, but it's never really been solved. And it's one of the great unsolved mysteries of all time. And it happens to be from my hometown, and probably one of the first bodies was dumped about 2 or 3 minutes from the house I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
And it dates from the 1930s. And that's one that really fascinates me. That's one that I really wish there was more attention given to, just because it's just historically, I love history. And I remember actually there was, it's torn down now, but when I was a kid, there was a building in Cleveland where they had because Elliott Ness ran for mayor of Cleveland. He did not win, but he ran. And there was one of these old brick buildings. You know how they used to paint the billboards on the sides of buildings? And it was faded, but you could still see Elliott Ness for mayor. I thought that was so cool as a kid growing up. So my point being, that's one of my favorite cases in terms of, I mean, I wish none of these happened, obviously. You don't want to see anybody die. And the thing that we have to remember, I think one thing in true crime that we always have to remember, we're not talking about characters in a play or a movie or a book. We're talking about real people with real lives who met their demise. The other interesting factoid is there's even a theory that there was a doctor who may have been involved. And the doctor was a doctor at the hospital I was born in.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so there's all these little ties. And it is considered by criminologists one of the great unsolved cases. Another one that's fascinating to me, because I am very interested in the historical cases, is H.H. Holmes. Do you all know of H.H. Holmes?
I was just going to mention him because I live 10 minutes from where he was born.
Yeah,
Oh,
see, similar.
Yeah, from the
thing.
house he was born. Yeah, it's right down the road from me.
Yeah, for those of you watching who don't know, H.H. Holmes was a gentleman, and I use the word loosely, who built a house that was basically a murder machine. And what I've heard apocryphally is that he built this house and he had it constructed by different people so they wouldn't know what was being done. But essentially what he'd do is he opened up his home to be a place for people traveling to the World's Fair. And he would say, we've got this great place we can put you up at. He would get them in the rooms. He would gas them, throw them down these chutes from the room to the basement. Then he would murder them. And then, how can I say this nicely? Take the flesh off of their bodies and then sell their skeletons for profit.
Wow.
Not a good guy. And I think there was talk that there was going to be a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and directed by Scorsese, maybe. I don't know. But I don't know what the status of that is, if that's still going to happen or not. But I think it's one of the most fascinating cases. But still, again, you know, we were talking earlier before we hit record about Dahmer. It's just, I don't understand how people can do those kind of things to other people.
That'd be totally disconnected from the humanness, I think. That's
right.
Just,
Well, it makes you question their soul. Like, do they have a soul? Are they soulless and just here in human form? There's so many different, different aspects that could be looked into as far as that, because how can you have any humanity at all and be able to, to do that?
Right.
But it's,
I'm of two minds, because I've always said I feel that evil exists on some level, but then again, you also have to keep into account things like insanity. But then when you're talking about insanity, there's a difference between criminal insanity and insanity in a medical sense. So they're again, this is the reason to be very careful with true crime, because you got to watch what you're saying and how you categorize things. I do think that in many of these cases, there's some element of mental illness. I don't know how there couldn't be. I also believe that there is something to the thought of evil. Now, I've talked to authors who say, oh, no, there is no evil. It's just mental illness, or in some cases, sometimes people are just truly bad. I tend to be a believer in both, that they both contribute to these kind of things. I don't see how anybody in their right mind could kill people. I just don't get it. But
that's a good thing. That's a good thing that you don't get it.
Yeah.
We don't want to get it.
That's right.
So Jim, you've been collecting campfire stories. So you've collected them into a book form too. So people who like to read can.
Oh yes, actually we have 5 books now. The sad part is I haven't done one for 6 years, but we have 5 books. And you can find those on Amazon and at JimHaroldBooks.com, which will take you to a page with the Amazon links. But there's 5 books. Each book has 70 stories in it. And basically what we do is we take the best stories and we only slightly rewrite them so they'll flow better in the written form. But we don't change any facts. We don't exaggerate. We don't make things up. We're just saying this is what this person set happen. I find it to be very, very fascinating, these stories. And it's funny, most of the time people find the books through the podcast, but occasionally I get somebody say, oh, I read your book and then I found your podcast. So that's always kind of fun. But
Cool.
the goal is next year I am changing some ways I do my business. I'm getting some more outside editors to help me with the actual shows. So I have more time to do a book 6 next year, hopefully.
That'll
Maybe
be
it'll be a
awesome.
graphic novel, because I saw you were doing those coloring books with the stories in them. So
yes.
doing a graphic novel Campfire story would be awesome.
That would be awesome. That's a good idea. I'll have to look into that. But let me just say, I couldn't draw it. I can't draw a stick man. Len Peralta, who did the coloring book, a very talented artist. I said, how do you do that? I mean, I just don't get it. Some people, I sing a little bit and I don't understand when somebody says, well, I can't carry a tune. I sing flat. I don't understand that because I've always been able to do it. I think it's similar with artists because they'll just say, oh, I just draw. It's like, well, how? Because I look like a 5-year-old. There's 5-year-olds that can draw much better than I can. So I always admire people who can do that.
Absolutely. And you said that your daughter also has a podcast. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, Cassandra has a show called Unpleasant Dreams. And for the first 2 seasons, we have done a series of cases, like the Detloff Pass case. That was a very mysterious case. The case of, I'm blanking on his name now, Robert Johnson, I believe, was the blues man who supposedly sold his soul to the devil. The Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction case, the unfortunate Elisa Lamb murder case, just strange and mysterious kind of things. We did over 20 episodes in that format. And we're going to do something a little different for season 3, and folks will have to tune in on Halloween to hear what that is. But that's Unpleasant Dreams. I'm very proud of that show. E.M. Helker, my assistant, wrote those episodes with a little tweaking by Cassandra, just very slight, but she just did. E.M. Helker just did a fascinating and great job of research on those. And I think it's a really good series on some very interesting cases, mainly kind of paranormal stuff. We did ones on things like spontaneous human combustion. A lot of interesting stuff. So Unpleasant Dreams, please check that out. And we've got another exciting season coming, but it'll be a little bit different in this coming season, but I think it'll be fun as well for those of you who love kind of spooky stuff.
You have so much content. That's awesome.
Yeah. Not to mention the podcast I'm doing with my wife, You Won't Believe What Happened to Me, which are non-paranormal stories of incredible things that have happened to people, celebrity encounters, narrowly missing death. I'd love to have a lottery winner on there. Just people who have had great, interesting stories have happened to them and have nothing
I'll
to do
volunteer for that one as soon as I win. Sorry. I like to predict these things. Yeah, no, that'd be fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I enjoy what I do. I feel very lucky to do it.
And we're happy you do it too, because definitely it's, like I said, very entertaining for the rest of us who get to listen to these stories and enjoy them. And it motivates me to clean. So I appreciate you. My house appreciates you too.
I wish I could listen to them and motivate me to clean.
It's great. Just get into it. Although I have to say, I still have to steer clear of your Hat Man stories. I cannot. I cannot. It scared me so. You had one like marathon of Hat Man stories, and I was like, you talked about how if you think about it, it'll manifest, and I'm just like, no, get out of my head.
Yeah, I do. I do wonder about that and the idea of tulpas, that some of this could be generated. I think that's a possibility. I don't think that these things are all explained by, I don't think there's one grand explanation. I think there's a lot of different explanations.
Yeah. Oh, so creepy. So much fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. This has been amazing as usual. Every experience with you is amazing. It's endless, and we'll love to have you on again next year.
I'd love to be here, and I hope everybody can check out JimHarold.com to find all the content and any podcast app that people use. certainly they can check it out there. And we have even a YouTube channel where we do some videos, youtube.com/JimHarold. So I hope people will check all the stuff out. And all three of you, thank you so much. It's always a highlight of the Halloween season to do that. And thank you for being so gracious as to invite me once again.
Thank you so much. I just have to share the winner real quick of the Share It Out, and that is Joanne Randazzo. So congratulations. And we will see you guys next week. Happy Halloween. And Jim, can you say it for us?
Happy Halloween and stay spooky.